Hey, welcome to Socialism for All. This file is being recorded for the April 2025 edition of Socialism for All, and it's an audiobook of Lenin's speech in defense of the tactics of the Communist International from 1921. If you like this video, please click like and subscribe, and consider supporting on Patreon or Buy Me a Coffee at patreon.com/socialismforall or buymeacoffee.com/socialismforall. There are links to Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee in the video description. So this piece is the second and final reading in section 3 of an anthology that we're doing as a playlist titled Lenin on Petty Bourgeois Revolutionism. The subject is ultra-leftism, and it's based on a collection that was published by the Soviet Union in 1979. So this piece, the speech in defense of tactics, is from a larger file, the Third Congress of the Communist International, which was written the 12th of June, 1921, and then the Congress took place June 22nd to July 12. We want to thank the Marxists Internet Archive, Marxists.org, for making this and thousands of other free Marxist texts available. The source on this one is Lenin's Collected Works, First English Edition, Progress Publishers, Moscow, 1965, Volume 32. Translated by Yuri Zdobnikov, HTML transcription and markup by David Walters and R. Simbala. Let's begin. Comrades, I deeply regret that I must confine myself to self-defense. I say deeply regret because after acquainting myself with Comrade Terracini's speech and the amendments introduced by 3 delegations, I should very much like to take the offensive. For, properly speaking, offensive operations are essential against the views defended by Terracini and these 3 delegations, which were the German, Austrian, and Italian delegations. If the Congress is not going to wage a vigorous offensive against such errors, against such ultra-left stupidities, the whole movement is doomed. That is my deep conviction. But we are organized and disciplined Marxists. We cannot be satisfied with speeches against individual comrades. We Russians are already sick and tired of these ultra-left phrases. We are men of organization. In drawing up our plans, we must proceed in an organized way and try to find the correct line. It is of course no secret that our theses are a compromise. And why not? Among communists who have already convened their Third Congress and have worked out definite fundamental principles, compromises under certain conditions are necessary. Our theses, put forward by the Russian delegation, were studied and prepared in the most careful way, and were the result of long arguments and meetings with various delegations. They aim at establishing the basic line of the Communist International, and are especially necessary now, after we have not only formally condemned the real centrists, but have expelled them from the party. Such are the facts. I have to stand up for these theses. Now, when Terracini comes forward and says that we must continue the fight against the centrists, and goes on to tell how it is intended to wage the fight, I say that if these amendments denote a definite trend, a relentless fight against this trend is essential, for otherwise there is no communism and no Communist International. I'm surprised that the German Communist Workers' Party has not put its signature to these amendments. Indeed, just listen to what Terracini is defending and what his amendments say. They begin in this way, quote, on page 1, column 1, line 19, the word majority should be deleted, unquote. Majority, that is extremely dangerous. Then further, instead of the words basic propositions, insert aims. Basic propositions and aims are 2 different things. Even the anarchists will agree with us about aims, because they too stand for the abolition of exploitation and class distinctions. I have met and talked with few anarchists in my life, but all the same, I've seen enough of them. I sometimes succeeded in reaching agreement with them about aims, but never as regards principles. Principles are not an aim, a program, a tactic, or a theory. Tactics and theory are not principles. How do we differ from the anarchists on principles? The principles of communism consist in the establishment of the dictatorship of the proletariat and in the use of state coercion in the transition period. Such are the principles of communism, but they are not its aim. And the comrades who have tabled this proposal have made a mistake. Secondly, it is stated there the word majority should be deleted. Read the whole passage, quote, the Third Congress of the Communist International is setting out to review questions of tactics under conditions when, in a whole number of countries, the objective situation has become aggravated in a revolutionary sense, and when a whole number of communist mass parties have been organized, which, incidentally, in their actual revolutionary struggle, have nowhere taken into their hands the virtual leadership of the majority of the working class, unquote. And so, they want the word majority deleted. If we cannot agree on such simple things, then I do not understand how we can work together and lead the proletariat to victory. Then it is not at all surprising that we cannot reach agreement on the question of principles either. Show me a party which has already won the majority of the working class. Terracini did not even think of adducing any example. Indeed, there is no such example. And so the word aims is to be put instead of principles, and the word majority is to be deleted. No thank you. We shall not do it. Even the German party, one of the best, does not have the majority of the working class behind it. That is a fact. We, who face a most severe struggle, are not afraid to utter this truth. But here you have 3 delegations who wish to begin with an untruth, for if the Congress deletes the word majority, it will show that it wants an untruth. That is quite clear. Then comes the following amendment, quote, on page 4, column 1, line 10, the words open letter, etc. should be deleted, unquote. And there's a footnote here, the open letter of the Central Committee of the United Communist Party of Germany to the Socialist Party of Germany, Independent Social Democratic Party of Germany, the Communist Workers' Party of Germany, and all trade unions, was published in the Red Banner on January 8, 1921. The UCPG called on all workers, trade unions, and socialist organizations to unite their forces in combating reaction and the capitalists' offensive against the working people's vital rights. Their program of joint action included demands for higher pensions for disabled war veterans, elimination of unemployment, improvement of the country's finances at the expense of the monopolies, introduction of factory and plant committee control over all stocks of food, raw materials, and fuel, restarting of all closed enterprises, control over sowing, harvesting, and marketing of farm produce by the peasants' councils together with the agricultural laborers' organizations, immediate disarming and dissolution of all bourgeois militarized organizations, establishment of workers' self-defense, amnesty of all political prisoners, immediate reestablishment of trade and diplomatic relations with Soviet Russia. Lenin said these tactics were, quote, quite correct. The right-wing leaders of the organizations to whom the open letter was addressed rejected the proposal for joint action with the communists, despite the fact that the workers came out for a united front of the proletariat. Back to the main text. I have already heard one speech today in which I found the same idea, but there it was quite natural. It was in the speech of Comrade Hempel, a member of the German Communist Workers' Party. He said, quote, the open letter was an act of opportunism, unquote. Wow. To my deep regret and shame, I have already heard such views privately, but when at the Congress, after such prolonged debate, the open letter is declared opportunist, that is a shame and a disgrace. And now Comrade Terracini comes forward on behalf of the 3 delegations and wants to delete the words open letter. What is the good then of the fight against the German Communist Workers' Party? The open letter is a model political step. Commenting, I completely second that. I was about to comment that is a great set of demands that we haven't seen. I mean, can you imagine advancing those kind of demands today? Continuing, this is stated in our theses and we must certainly stand by it. It is a model because it is the first act of a practical method of winning over the majority of the working class. In Europe, where almost all the proletarians are organized, we must win the majority of the working class, and anyone who fails to understand this is lost to the communist movement. They will never learn anything if they have failed to learn that much during the 3 years of the Great Revolution. Terracini says that we were victorious in Russia although the party was very small. He is dissatisfied with what is said in the theses about Czechoslovakia. Here there are 27 amendments, and if I had a mind to criticize them, I should, like some orators, have to speak for not less than 3 hours. We have heard here that in Czechoslovakia the Communist Party has 300 to 400,000 members, and that it is essential to win over the majority, to create an invincible force, and continue enlisting fresh masses of workers. Terracini is already prepared to attack. He says, if there are already 400,000 workers in the party, why should we want more? Delete. He is afraid of the word masses and wants to eradicate it. Comrade Terracini has understood very little of the Russian Revolution. In Russia, we were a small party, but we had with us in addition the majority of the Soviets of Workers' and Peasants' deputies throughout the country. Do you have anything of the sort? We had with us almost half the army, which then numbered at least 10 million men. Do you really have the majority of the army behind you? Show me such a country. If these views of Comrade Terracini are shared by 3 other delegations, then something is wrong in the International. Then we must say stop. There must be a decisive fight. Otherwise, the Communist International is lost. On the basis of my experience, I must say, although I am taking up a defensive position, that the aim and the principle of my speech consist in the defense of the resolution and theses proposed by our delegation. It would, of course, be pedantic to say that not a letter in them must be altered. I have had to read many resolutions, and I am well aware that very good amendments could be introduced in every line of them. But that would be pedantry. If nevertheless, I declare now that in a political sense not a single letter can be altered, it is because the amendments as I see them are of a quite definite political nature, and because they lead us along a path that is harmful and dangerous to the Communist International. Therefore, I and all of us in the Russian delegation must insist that not a single letter in the theses is altered. We have not only condemned our right-wing elements, we have expelled them. But if, like Terracini, people turn the fight against the rightists into a sport, then we must say stop, otherwise the danger will become too grave. Terracini has defended the theory of an offensive struggle. In this connection, the notorious amendments propose a formula 2 or 3 pages long. There is no need for us to read them. We know what they say. Terracini has stated the issue quite clearly. He has defended the theory of an offensive, pointing out, quote, dynamic tendencies and the, quote, transition from passivity to activity. We in Russia have already had adequate political experience in the struggle against the centrists. As long as 15 years ago, we were waging a struggle against our opportunists and centrists, and also against the Mensheviks. And we were victorious not only over the Mensheviks, but also over the semi-anarchists. If we had not done this, we would not have been able to retain power in our hands for 3.5 years, or even for 3.5 weeks, and we would not have been able to convene communist congresses here. Dynamic tendencies, transition from passivity to activity, these are all phrases the left socialist revolutionaries had used against us. Now they are in prison, defending there the aims of communism and thinking of the transition from passivity to activity. The line of reasoning followed in the proposed amendments is an impossible one, because they contain no Marxism, no political experience, and no reasoning. Have we, in our theses, elaborated a general theory of the revolutionary offensive? Has Radek or any one of us committed such a stupidity? We have spoken of the theory of an offensive in relation to a quite definite country and at a quite definite period. From our struggle against the Mensheviks, we can quote instances showing that even before the first revolution, there were some who doubted whether the Revolutionary Party ought to conduct an offensive. If such doubts assailed any social democrat, as we all called ourselves at the time, we took up the struggle against them and said that they were an opportunist, that they didn't understand anything of Marxism and the dialectics of the Revolutionary Party. Is it really possible for a party to dispute whether a revolutionary offensive is permissible in general? To find such examples in this country, one would have to go back some 15 years. If there are centrists or disguised centrists who dispute the theory of the offensive, they should be immediately expelled. That question cannot give rise to disputes. But the fact that even now, after 3 years of the Communist International, we are arguing about dynamic tendencies, about the transition from passivity to activity, that is a shame and a disgrace. We do not have any dispute about this with Comrade Radek, who drafted these theses jointly with us. Perhaps it was not quite correct to begin talking in Germany about the theory of the revolutionary offensive when an actual offensive had not been prepared. Nevertheless, the March action was a great step forward in spite of the mistakes of its leaders. But this does not matter. Hundreds of thousands of workers fought heroically. However courageously the German Communist Workers' Party fought against the bourgeoisie, we must repeat what Comrade Radek said in a Russian article about Holtz. If anyone, even an anarchist, fights heroically against the bourgeoisie, that is of course a great thing. But it is a real step forward if hundreds of thousands fight against the vile provocation of these social traitors and against the bourgeoisie. It is very important to be critical of one's mistakes. We began with that. If anyone, after a struggle in which hundreds of thousands have taken part, comes out against this struggle and behaves like Levi, then they should be expelled. And that is what was done. But we must draw a lesson from this. Had we really prepared for an offensive? Here Radek shouts out, we had not even prepared for defense. Indeed, only newspaper articles talked of an offensive. This theory, as applied to the March action in Germany in 1921, was incorrect, we have to admit that. But in general, the theory of the revolutionary offensive is not at all false. We were victorious in Russia, and with such ease, because we prepared for our revolution during the imperialist war. That was the first condition. 10 million workers and peasants in Russia were armed, and our slogan was an immediate peace at all costs. We were victorious because the vast mass of the peasants were revolutionarily disposed against the big landowners. The socialist revolutionaries, the adherents of the Second and the 2.5 Internationals, were a big peasant party in November 1917. They demanded revolutionary methods, but, like true heroes of the Second and the 2.5 Internationals, lacked the courage to act in a revolutionary way. In August and September 1917, we said, quote, theoretically, we are fighting the socialist revolutionaries as we did before, but practically we are ready to accept their program because only we are able to put it into effect, unquote. We did just what we said. The peasantry, ill-disposed toward us in November 1917 after our victory, who sent a majority of socialist revolutionaries into the Constituent Assembly, were won over by us, if not in the course of a few days, as I mistakenly expected and predicted, at any rate in the course of a few weeks. The difference was not great. Can you point out any country in Europe where you could win over the majority of the peasantry in the course of a few weeks? Italy, perhaps? Laughter from the crowd. If it is said that we were victorious in Russia in spite of not having a big party, that only proves that those who say it have not understood the Russian Revolution, and that they have absolutely no understanding of how to prepare for a revolution. Our first step was to create a real communist party, so as to know whom we were talking to and whom we could fully trust. The slogan of the first and second Congresses was, "Down with the centrists." We cannot hope to master even the ABC of communism unless all along the line and throughout the world we make short shrift of the centrists and semi-centrists, whom in Russia we call Mensheviks. Our first task is to create a genuinely revolutionary party and to break with the Mensheviks. But that is only a preparatory school. We are already convening the Third Congress, and Comrade Terracini keeps saying that the task of the preparatory school consists in hunting out, pursuing, and exposing centrists and semi-centrists. No thank you. We've already done this long enough. At the Second Congress, we said that the centrists are our enemies, but we must go forward really. The second stage, after organizing into a party, consists in learning to prepare for revolution. In many countries, we have not even learned how to assume the leadership. We were victorious in Russia not only because the undisputed majority of the working class was on our side. During the elections in 1917, the overwhelming majority of the workers were with us against the Mensheviks, but also because half the army, immediately after our seizure of power, and 9/10 of the peasants in the course of some weeks, came over to our side. We were victorious because we adopted the agrarian program of the socialist revolutionaries instead of our own and put it into effect. Our victory lay in the fact that we carried out the socialist revolutionary program. That is why this victory was so easy. Is it possible that you in the West can have such illusions? It's ridiculous. Just compare the concrete economic conditions, Comrade Terracini, and all of you who have signed the proposed amendments. In spite of the fact that the majority so rapidly came to be on our side, the difficulties confronting us after our victory were very great. Nevertheless, we won through because we kept in mind not only our aims but also our principles, and did not tolerate in our party those who kept silent about principles but talked of aims, dynamic tendencies, and the transition from passivity to activity. Perhaps we shall be blamed for preferring to keep such gentlemen in prison, but dictatorship is impossible in any other way. We must prepare for dictatorship, and this consists in combating such phrases and such amendments. Throughout, our theses speak of the masses, but comrades, we need to understand what is meant by masses. The German Communist Workers' Party, the left-wing comrades misused this word, but Comrade Terracini too, and all those who have signed these amendments do not know how the word masses should be read. I've been speaking too long as it is, hence I wish to say only a few words about the concept of masses. It is one that changes in accordance with the changes in the nature of the struggle. At the beginning of the struggle, it took only a few thousand genuinely revolutionary workers to warrant talk of the masses. If the party succeeds in drawing into the struggle not only its own members, if it also succeeds in arousing non-party people, it is well on the way to winning the masses. During our revolutions, there were instances when several thousand workers represented the masses. In the history of our movement and of our struggle against the Mensheviks, you will find many examples where several thousand workers in a town were enough to give a clearly mass character to the movement. You have a mass when several thousand non-party workers, who usually live a Philistine life and drag out a miserable existence, and who have never heard anything about politics, begin to act in a revolutionary way. If the movement spreads and intensifies, it gradually develops into a real revolution. We saw this in 1905 and 1917 during 3 revolutions, and you too will have to go through all this. When the revolution has been sufficiently prepared, the concept masses becomes different. Several thousand workers no longer constitute the masses. This word begins to denote something else. The concept of masses undergoes a change so that it implies the majority, and not simply a majority of the workers alone, but the majority of all the exploited. Any other kind of interpretation is impermissible for a revolutionary, and any other sense of the word becomes incomprehensible. It is possible that even a small party, the British or American party for example, after it has thoroughly studied the course of political development and become acquainted with the life and customs of the non-party masses, will at a favorable moment evoke a revolutionary movement. Comrade Roddick has pointed to the miners' strike as a good example, meaning the British miners' strike April to June 1921. You will have a mass movement if such a party comes forward with its slogans at such a moment and succeeds in getting millions of workers to follow it. I would not altogether deny that a revolution can be started by a very small party and brought to a victorious conclusion, but one must have a knowledge of the methods by which the masses can be won over. For this, thoroughgoing preparation of revolution is essential. But here you have comrades coming forward with the assertion that we should immediately give up the demand for, quote, big masses. They must be challenged. Without thoroughgoing preparation, you will not achieve victory in any country. Quite a small party is sufficient to lead the masses. At certain times, there is no necessity for big organizations. But to win, we must have the sympathy of the masses. An absolute majority is not always essential, but what is essential to win and retain power is not only the majority of the working class, and I use the term working class in its West European sense, i.e. in the sense of the industrial proletariat, but also the majority of the working and exploited rural population. Have you thought about this? Do we find in Terracini's speech even a hint at this thought? He speaks only of dynamic tendency and the transition from passivity to activity. Does he devote even a single word to the food question? And yet the workers demand their victuals, although they can put up with a great deal and go hungry, as we have seen to a certain extent in Russia. We must therefore win over to our side not only the majority of the working class, but also the majority of the working and exploited rural population. Have you prepared for this? Almost nowhere. And so, I repeat, I must unreservedly defend our theses, and I feel I am bound to do it. We not only condemned the centrists, but expelled them from the party. Now we must deal with another aspect, which we also consider dangerous. We must tell the comrades the truth in the most polite form, and in our theses it is told in a kind and considerate way, so that no one feels insulted. We are confronted now by other, more important questions than that of attacks on the centrists. We have had enough of this question. It has already become somewhat boring. Instead, the comrades ought to learn to wage a real revolutionary struggle. The German workers have already begun this. Hundreds of thousands of proletarians in that country have been fighting heroically. Anyone who opposes this struggle should be immediately expelled. But after that, we must not engage in empty word spinning, but must immediately begin to learn, on the basis of the mistakes made, how to organize the struggle better. We must not conceal our mistakes from the enemy. Anyone who is afraid of this is no revolutionary. On the contrary, if we openly declare to the workers, yes, we have made mistakes, it will mean that they will not be repeated, and we shall be able better to choose the moment. And if, during the struggle itself, the majority of the working people prove to be on our side, not only the majority of the workers, but the majority of all the exploited and oppressed, then we shall really be victorious. And that's the end of the audiobook. I really like this one. Although it's relatively short compared to a lot of other works, it hits on some really important topics, and I'm glad that Novosti included this in the collection. Because it's true, at some point you have to go beyond just agreeing on principles and what you stand for, etc., and you have to think about how do you actually build the movement to do what needs to be done. And I thought it was really interesting hearing Lenin talk about some of the particulars of what they did in Russia. It's sort of a good guideline to keep in mind as we move forward, building a movement of our own in whatever country you are listening to this from. And speaking of you, what do you think? Leave a question or comment below, and we will continue the discussion in the comment section as always. Otherwise, thanks for listening, and thanks to the current patrons and Buy Me a Coffee supporters whose names are on the screen. If you'd like to get your name on the screen, head to patreon.com/socialismforall or buymeacoffee.com/socialismforall, and you can sign up for just a few dollars a month or more, or make a one-time donation, whatever you see fit. Every contribution is encouraging, they're also materially helpful, and they allow me to spend a lot more time on this channel than I would be able to do without them. So huge thanks to everybody who is supporting now and has supported. It really does make a difference in this viewer-funded effort. Beyond that, engagement counts, so like, share, subscribe to help boost the channel. And remember, we can agitate and educate online, but the organizing happens in real life. So connect with your local left, take what you've learned here into that movement, network with other people, find out what projects you can become part of and contribute to and help advance and help to intensify the class struggle. Thanks again, and we will see you in the next video.